Hello!
Hello! We're back with a brand new series. Now, it might go wrong, but we sincerely hope not, because we're aiming to produce something pretty special.
We have all the beauty, drama and spectacle of what has been and is the most extraordinary spring in history.
Yes, and from what we've seen so far, nature is quite possibly at its very best.
So sit down, buckle up and brace yourselves for what's going to be a very memorable series of Springwatch. This is a year like no other we've ever encountered. Everyone is having to adapt to unprecedented times. People are grieving, struggling, and battling with the most tragic situations that they will ever encounter in their lives. And this series is not to take away from any of these realities. But there is one thing that's happened this year that's perhaps offered solace to everyone, a real message of hope. The power, the therapy, the existence of the natural world. This has been a spring to experience everywhere. Whilst we've been mostly locked up indoors, wildlife, of course, has been enjoying its busiest time of the year. And this spring has been special. It's been so quiet that wildlife has been allowed to prosper. Throughout this series, we're going to reveal the extraordinary spring of 2020. A spring with heartwarming stories, stories of wonder, and stories of hope. We've got the very best camera operators in the world, up and down the country. And this year, they've had a little bit more time on their hands. They've been out and about, capturing this spring, this very special spring, in full, glorious Technicolor. There's never been a more important time for us to take the time to appreciate the wildlife outside our window. Strange days. Very strange days indeed. You know, there's not a morning I don't wake up and think, this can't be happening. It's really weird, isn't it? A lot of people are finding it difficult, some very difficult, some nigh impossible to deal with the levels of stress that this tragedy is generating. But we think we've got an offer for you. And to take advantage of that offer, all you have to do is tune in to BBC Two from Tuesday to Friday for the next 3 weeks. Through the best of British wildlife, we're going to offer you the pure and simple beauty of nature. And we think that might put a smile on your face and a spring in your step. What do you think? It's got to be worth a go, isn't it? Okay, let's get started. Hello and welcome to Springwatch 2020. A Springwatch, I promise you, like no other at all. Yes, the BBC is really upping its game for one of the most technically challenging outside broadcasts ever. We are all, the entire team, spread all over the country. The vast majority of our team, I've got to tell you, are in their homes, in their bedrooms, in their garages. I won't say their toilets, but all the Zoom calls might reveal that at some stage in the near future. Whatever, we are all strictly adhering to the government guidelines. I'm down here in a field very close to my home, about 100 metres over there, with just 2 cameramen. We're taking it all very seriously, but we do aim to get the very best programme that we possibly can for you. So we're up to all of our usual tricks. Yes, we do have cameras on nest. Those tiny technological marvels are sticking their noses into other species' business. Here are 9 of them, lots of activity. We'll be taking a look at some of those, of course, a bit later in the programme. You can follow them online, and of course we've got plenty of others coming up throughout the course of the series. But where are we all then? Well, I'm here in a field, very obviously, a field adjacent to the New Forest in Hampshire. I've got a map over here that I'm going to stick myself on so you can see precisely where I am. There, in the middle of the south of England. And I've been here inside this house and in this area for the last 8 weeks, taking this lockdown very, very seriously. I have a vulnerable father that I've needed to look after. But I have been taking my daily exercise, that hour's walking, sometimes at dusk, out there in the national park, and setting up some trip cameras at a local badger set. And look what I found. Firstly, badgers coming out in daylight, because it's been so much quieter. But look, not just normally coloured badgers, but an erythritic badger, potentially a leucistic badger. And all of this is down to their genetics and the amount of pigment in their skin. But look, pigment and genetics aside, at this point in time, what an animal. What a beautiful little animal that is. I can't tell you. When I first saw those pictures on my trip camera, my heart missed a beat. I've seen very few of these. They're not that rare, but they are very special, and we'll be seeing a lot more of them. But it's not all about the New Forest, of course. We need a bit of geographical spread. So I'm very pleased to say that Iolo Williams is going to be telling us all about his patch and more up here in central Wales. How are you going, Iolo?
Yes, not just central Wales, Chris, but glorious mid-Wales. Just look at this, and I'm so pleased to be here because it's in these fields, these trees, these rivers, these streams that I first fell in love with wildlife. And this spring, it's been like going back to being 12 years old again. I've spent so much time out and about, and I've got to say, so far, it's been an exceptional year for butterflies. Some of them familiar, like the orange tip. I think most of us know the orange tip. This is the male with its stunning white and orange wings, of course, but less familiar ones, like the holly blue. I usually see half a dozen a year. I've seen over 20 so far this year, but the first one I saw was this one, the brimstone butterfly, on the 23rd of March. So yes, so far it has been a glorious spring up here. And of course, as ever, we have Gillian with us, and she is down in her home county of Cornwall.
Yes, Iolo, I am in Cornwall, but I'm not quite at home. I don't have a garden. I guess like lots of people, I don't have a garden or an outdoor space to showcase spring. But I do have all of this right near my home. And I'm on Woodland Valley Farm, a small corner of which is given over to this amazing experiment, the Cornwall Beaver Project. I love coming down here. It is like a little pocket of wilderness, and this is why. The beavers themselves have created all this incredible habitat, and I'm really looking forward to sharing all of this with you, this amazing place, the amazing project, of course, the amazing animals themselves, which we, of course, are hoping to get live shots of later on in the show. Fingers crossed. And you know what? Wishes come true. Here we go, live beavers right now. Just in the corner, this time, this is where they come out, and we've seen them a lot the last few evenings, coming out this time of the day. And they're out initially foraging, inspecting their territory, inspecting their dams. And it is just so lovely to see them out like this. This is like a relic from the past. So of course, we really hope when we come back later in the show, we have more live beaver, but for now, it's back to Chris.
Live beaver at the top of the show. That's what you pay your licence fee for, isn't it? Oh, what a start. What a start, superb stuff. Now, that's me here in Hampshire, Iolo there in mid-Wales, Gillian down in the southwest. I've got to tell you that later on in the programme, we've got some beautiful pictures coming from up here in Orkney. So we are spreading ourselves all over the UK, but to help us do that, each week we're going to be joined by a special guest presenter. And this week's is very special indeed, the highly knowledgeable, highly active and energetic, the one and only Mr. Steve Batshaw, who is down here on the banks of the Thames.
Spot on, Chris. Yeah, that is exactly where I am. I'm on the Berkshire-Buckinghamshire border and on a section of the Thames that is usually pretty busy. But it's been given a remarkable break, a break from our traffic for the last few months, which has had extraordinary effects. So it's been transforming. I mean, I would challenge you to find a habitat in the country that has been as transformed as it has been here over the last few months. Pretty much every evening on a windless night, the river is like a mirror, and the amount of mayflies and caddisflies and things that come to feed on them are absolutely extraordinary. This has been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the river I love positively thrive.
So you've got Packham, Williams, Burke and Backshaw, but we're still one short. The one and only Michaela Strachan, very sadly, can't be with us this year. She's under a strict lockdown in South Africa. But fortunately, I was able to have a brief chat with her earlier. Michaela, we're all very sorry you can't join us for this series here in the UK. But how are you doing over there? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, Chris. Very sorry that I can't be joining you this year. I'm in serious lockdown still in Cape Town in South Africa with not a hope of getting to the UK to enjoy British wildlife in the spring. So I'm just going to have to stay here and enjoy autumn wildlife of South Africa.
Michaela, here in the UK, many people have found respite from this hideous catastrophe by connecting with nature. I trust you've been out and about yourself doing that.
Chris, you'll be pleased to hear my binoculars have been round my neck and I've really been enjoying the wildlife on my patch. And everyone's been doing that all over the world, I think. You know, there's less pollution, there's less disturbance, the skies are cleaner, and a lot of the wildlife is thriving. But even more important than that, I think, is that people have had the time to really enjoy and appreciate the wildlife that's around them. And that's absolutely brilliant.
Look, I know you're not going to be here in person, but you have chosen some of your favourite moments, your series highlights, haven't you?
Chris, I'm not there in person. I'll certainly be there in spirit. And you're right, I've chosen some of the highlights of pre-recorded films and also some of the live cameras that we've had over the years. And we're going to be showing those throughout the series. So you're not getting rid of me completely, Chris. I'll be there.
Don't worry, I'll keep that spot on the sofa warm for Autumn Watch. We'll see you then. In the meantime, stay safe. We miss you.
I'll miss you too, but I'll be sitting back with the rest of the audience and enjoying the show. Have a great one. Bye.
Wonderful woman, Michaela Strachan. She'll be sadly missed, but back for Autumn Watch, rest assured. One thing she did say there is about people taking the time to connect with nature. It's exactly what I've been doing throughout the course of this lockdown, actually in these woods. That's where I've been taking most of my daily exercise. But instead of speeding through with the poodles, I've been stopping and looking and listening. And this actually has not just made my spring. My walks here have probably saved my spring. This is probably my favourite spot on planet Earth. This is my emotional, ecological home. I mean, I live in a house, it's just over there. This is the woods just beyond it where I take my daily 1 hour of exercise. But this old droveway avenue of trees is where I feel most connected. I've grown up in this environment. This is oak, hazel, beech, woodland. The sights, the sounds, the smells of this are all familiar to me. So I just feel really comfortable here. Just listen. It's just layers of birdsong. Chiff-chapping just started. Robins, blackbirds. It's an orchestra of therapy. And it's so quiet, there's no planes overhead. Normally I can hear the distant rumble of a road on the other side of the woods. But now there's nothing but the birdsong. It's like nature's been distilled back into its primal form, and therefore it's so much bigger and brighter and louder and more accessible. Typically through spring I'm working away from home a lot, but I've seen it this year gradually move from day to day, and I've seen this spring complete for the first time. I haven't been to this little patch for 2 days, and the last time I came here, it was glossy green, and now it's blue. That's how quickly these bluebells have opened their dangling little flowers. I think we get preoccupied as naturalists with just identifying things. Bumblebee, bluebell, bracken. We note it and we move on. But because we've got more time, it's giving us that ability to retrain ourselves, get rid of that urgency to move through an environment, just noting things down, doing our surveys, ticking the boxes. But actually now it's far more about being in that space with these organisms. It's going back to that primal excitement that I had when I was a kid. You know, when you first saw something for the first time. When I look up this oak tree into the canopy, that is the full force of spring. Look at that colour. That colour will only exist for a few days. These leaves have just opened. They're soft and ripe and palatable, and they don't want them to be eaten. So very soon the tree will pump these leaves full of noxious chemicals and tannins to make them impossible for things like caterpillars to munch them. And this whole thing, this is a light factory. It's harvesting light from the sun to get its energy, and look how it's competing with the other light factories. There's hardly a gap between them. Their branches and twigs have filled every last piece of sky. And how that cuckoo, yes, yes, that's the first cuckoo. It's not the first cuckoo that's been heard in the UK, but it's the first one for me on my little patch. It's fantastic. These days, the sound of a cuckoo is like massively important. You know, when I first got into birds in the 70s, I'd hear cuckoos at home all the time. But like so many of our other sub-Saharan migrants, they've endured catastrophic declines. So to hear a cuckoo now is a treat. That's a sparkling little jewel to add to my collection of springtime events that are going on here. I don't know how many more springs I'm going to have that are going to be punctuated by the first cuckoo that I hear at home. But I'm certainly enjoying this one. I am seizing this spring with both hands, and ears and eyes and nose. My mum used to say, you've always got to try and find good in the bad. There's no doubt there's been terrible, terrible bad this spring, but what I've been striving to do in there, in those walks that I've been taking, is find some good for me personally. But I'm not alone. It's clear, looking at social media, newspapers, TV, that so many more people have been doing exactly the same thing. They too have been finding solace and respite in nature.
I found so much solace in nature during these difficult times, from finding out new species of insects like bee flies and scorpion flies.
I'm a student nurse. I have really busy shifts, and I just love coming home, listening to all the birds because they're just so loud. I just feel much better for it.
Are you going to sing for us again? I've been a frazzled mummy, but nature is absolutely the key to staying sane during this lockdown.
Look at that. So, mental health is excellent because of these beauties.
I've really enjoyed getting to watch all the trees and plants bloom this year. Going on a walk and one day it's all wintry and empty, and then the next day you come out and everything's come to life. It's like summer.
This hedge has been the highlight of my lockdown. There's a yellowhammer, and that's why. A little bit of bread, no cheese, and I love it.
One thing thing that I've been doing to help me get through lockdown is by setting out my homemade moth trap more often. And it's a great way to show that nature's still active even when we're not.
What puts a smile on my face every day is ducklings. One can't help but be lifted by 12 ducklings and a mother at the front door waiting for breakfast every morning. Life doesn't seem so bad after that.
I love that. A little bit of bread and no cheese, a yellow hammer in a hedgerow. It's been putting a smile on that person's face. A moth on a finger of a child, some mallard ducklings in a paddling pool, and the guy said it put a smile on his face, and now it's putting a smile on mine because it's infectious. Our connection with nature in its simple purity is so infectious. And of course it's continuing, the lockdown is continuing. People are still getting out every day, taking their exercise, looking out the windows in their gardens. Please, we'd love to see what you are seeing. Send us your photographs or any videos that you've got through the usual channels at BBC Springwatch on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So we've been locked down, but nature, of course, hasn't been locked down. It's been enjoying the peace and quiet that we've afforded it. And in some places, it's really taken advantage of that. Here, look, in this harbour, bottlenose dolphins. And apparently they haven't been in that harbour for at least 8 years. An otter running across someone's lawn. I wish it was my lawn, I have to say. And perhaps best of all, look at this. Harbour porpoises 12 miles up the River Tone in Somerset. And the goats there that came off of Great Orme and down into the town of Llandudno in North Wales. I particularly love that one because of a newspaper headline. Yep, the hacks really got their brains into order. Do you know what the headline was? This town's coming like a goat town. A special headline indeed. Truly fantastic. Nice to see nature taking advantage of the little space that we gave it. And we've got to make sure that when things get back to their new normal, there's still space for that nature too. Well, we've been up to our usual tricks. We've been putting cameras into nests, but not here, not in one place, not in a central hub. We've got a couple of hubs, and the first one that we're going to look to is down in the Mendip Hills. So in the sort of southwest, if you like, of England. And you can see that's where I am in the New Forest, about 80 miles away. We have a small team of people observing all of those lockdown rules, and they've been working very hard to get the cameras on this selection of nests. Plenty of activity. You can watch these online, as I've already said, and throughout the course of the rest of the series. Look in the top corner though, the one in the top right hand corner. It's empty. Yes, here it is live. I'm afraid they fledged yesterday. Should have been here yesterday, the old maxim. This was a nuthatch nest and there were 7 youngsters in it and they started to leave yesterday morning. Now, nuthatches are doing really well in the UK. There's about 250,000 pairs of them, and they're on the up. They've increased. The long-term trend is up by 252%. And in the early part of the last century, you'd pretty much find them in the southeast. By 1989, they got to Scotland, and now, as I say, they're doing really, really well. And all of these, as you can see, are doing a great job of fledging. If you look closely, you can see that that nest box that they're in, they will go into nest boxes, they'll nest in hollows in trees as well. You can see it's been chewed open, I think probably by a grey squirrel, but then the nuthatches have put mud on it to seal it up. Number 6 doesn't so much fledge as fall out of the nest, which leaves just one in it. There's always one that's left behind, but it does give us a chance to look at the nest. Look, no feathers, no grass, no hair, just pine flakes. And if there's a pine tree within 100 metres of a nuthatch nest, that's what they choose to line it with. And they typically like to nest near streams as well, so they can get that mud. Look, here's the 7th one, lagging. Go on, go on. It's a big wide world out there where you can hack nuts. So they got their name, nut hacker. It's great to see though, the first of our nests fledging successfully. Let's take a look at another one live now. Similar sort of bird, feeds on the trunks of trees, but here it's a tree creeper. Now this is the outside view. If you look really carefully, you can see that some of that bark is quite loose, and tucked in behind it, if we look inside, you can see the nest. Again, it's not a brilliantly constructed affair. Grass, a few leaves, and some youngsters down inside. They're not very active at the moment. They've been quite difficult to see. It's quite a deep cup. But we have been following this over the last few days, watching both adults coming in with plenty of food. Oh, there's a bit of activity there, and you can see those little yellow gapes. There are 5 youngsters in the nest, and both adults are bringing in all sorts of insects, lots of spiders as well. They use their long curved bills to probe in amongst the bark and under leaves, catching all of those invertebrates. And here one scoots out, one that was brooding them, and the other bird is coming in with a beak full of spiders. Look at that, great stuff. Lovely to watch this. We have watched them before on Springwatch, sometimes I have to say with disastrous consequences, because a staggering 36% of our tree creepers' nest fail due to nest predation. Weasels, red squirrels, and what we've seen before, great spotted woodpeckers. And this was Sunday morning, and this woodpecker's come in and it's right outside the nest. But look, they're hunkering down. There's not any movement, any noise from those chicks. They know something that's not one of their parents is outside, and they're doing exactly the right thing, sitting dead still. And I don't think that that woodpecker saw them. That was Sunday morning, and typically, had the woodpecker seen them, it would have come back by now and predated them. I think it was doing woodpeckery stuff on the outside of the tree, looking for its typical food, and it didn't actually notice that the tree creepers were in there. I don't know what you think, Yolo, but I'm going to take the Michaela optimistic line in her absence and say that I think that for the time being at least, those tree creepers are going to be okay.
I never thought I'd see the day when Chris Packham, the eternal pessimist, turns into Michaela Strachan. Chris, you've been in lockdown far too long, but you are right about one thing. It has been a very busy weekend for many of our nests, and none more so actually than this bird. It's a new bird for the watches. We've never covered it before. It's a Canada goose. We have a female sitting on a nest there in the Mendips, and at present, she's sitting on 3 eggs. It's a big bird, of course, not native to this country, introduced from North America some 250 years ago. But originally she had 4 eggs. So what happened? Well, for that, we've got to go back to Saturday when she spent an inordinate amount of time away from the nest. And each time she would do what ducks and geese do. She would cover the eggs using the down feathers as she left. This was in the evening. She was certain the eggs would be fine, but unfortunately, not on this occasion, because a few minutes later this happened. Carrion crow pops into view. It's obviously been watching the goose. That intelligent bird, it peels back the down, exposes the eggs, hammers away and takes one of the eggs just out of shot, opens it up, and soon afterwards it pulls out a well-developed goose embryo. Look at that. We mustn't vilify the bird because that is an important meal for that crow. It then flies off. A few minutes later, the goose comes back once more, looks a little bit mystified at first, looks around, she knows something's gone on because she can see the mess in the nest, but all she does is starts to tidy things up, pulling the feathers back in around herself, making sure that the remaining eggs are nice and warm. So we've got 3 eggs in there. Will they survive? Well, that crow, I'm pretty sure, will be back. Now, Springwatch wouldn't be Springwatch unless we brought you blue tits in a nest box. And this year is no different. Here we are, a nest box in a woodland in the Mendip Hills. And let's have a look inside. And here we are. 3 fairly well-grown chicks there, looking quite content. It's been very warm, so that's helped them a bit. But this box really does have a story to tell. If we go way back, there were 8 or 9 eggs, 7 of those hatched, 7 gaping mouths in there. But we soon learnt that the provisioning rate, that is the rate at which the adults were bringing in food, was a lot lower than it should be. And what we found out is that there's only the one bird. Almost certainly it'll be a female. So what's happened to the male? Well, the male has obviously died or moved on, and gradually some of the chicks perished. There simply wasn't enough food coming in to maintain all of those chicks. Next it was 6 chicks, then it was 5 chicks, and finally the 4th chick was removed by the parents, because if it was left there it would rot, it would attract parasites, possibly predators as well. But the good news is that over the last 24 hours she has been looking after the remaining 3 chicks very well, brooding them and feeding them, making sure that they're all getting enough food. So there is actually quite a strong possibility, and I know I'm going to sound like Michaela Strachan now, there is actually quite a strong possibility that all 3 of those chicks could survive. And you see that the feathers are starting to grow, so they'll be able to self-regulate their temperature before too long. So I'm quite hopeful for those. Now that's only a selection of the nests we've got for you. We've got so many more. We'll be watching them 24/7, 7 days a week, and so can you. All you have to do is go onto the Springwatch website. But we've got more for you as well, because as well as those nests in the Malvern Hills, we also have nests down in Monmouthshire. Now Monmouthshire is about 2 hours southeast of where I am here, right down in the southeast corner of Wales, and we have 2 fantastic raptor nests for you. The first one is this, a long-eared owl nest. Look at that, in the evening light, a mother with 3 fairly well-grown chicks in an old crow nest on the edge of an upland plantation. And the other bird, another bird of prey, is also in a mature plantation. This one is a magnificent goshawk. Look at that, huge goshawk nest, high up in a pine tree in a mature woodland in Monmouthshire. And we'll be following those and all the other nests over the next 3 weeks. Well, this week, of course, we have the wonderful Steve Backshall joining us from the banks of the River Thames. Steve, how has spring been for you?
Unusual, Yolo, that's for sure. I, unlike many others, have not had unlimited time on my hands because my wife Helen had twins in January and we've got a toddler as well. So I have to say, working on Springwatch is the first break I've had all year. But this is where we spent lockdown, in the Chiltern Hills and on the banks of the River Thames. And it's been a very, very strange time for the Thames, that's for sure. This is normally quite a busy, trammelled section of the river, and it has been for several hundred years, probably since before the Industrial Revolution. There's a wharf just downstream of here where timber and locally made paper would have been sent out into the river. This would have been like a motorway. And just across the way from here is a gravel pit, which is my little piece of paradise. So head there in the autumn and the winter, and it is alive with swans and geese and ducks, shovelers, goldeneye, tufted ducks, you know, lapwings in clouds that seem to block out what remains of the sun. And then come the start of the new year, the first birds to get started again in actually breeding are the herons. So the heronry that we have over there in the chalk pit, in the gravel pit, sorry, it is not giant, great big trees. Instead, they're on islands, so they're protected from terrestrial predators by the water. And getting started that early in February is pretty bold, because it would just take one, you know, Siberian cold front coming through to wreck everything. That didn't happen this year. So come April, we had the youngsters already fledged, ready to fly, and battling with each other in those rather kind of rough-looking nests. You know, 2 youngsters, brother and sister, stuck together in a confined space. There is a lot of fighting goes on. I'm guessing any parents who've had youngsters through lockdown can totally associate with that. Mind you, in herons it can be a bit more serious. Siblicide and even cannibalism are not unknown. This period in time has been known as the Great Pause to many, a time when we've put our lives on hold, and that really hasn't been the case for our wildlife, far from it. Kenneth Graham wrote The Wind in the Willows just over there, and I think what he was envisaging, imagining, was how we've had the Thames for the last few months. It has been tranquil. It's been, in some cases, almost disturbingly quiet. Certainly not something I have ever seen before, and the wildlife has raced to take advantage of that. As a section of the river that does enjoy quite a lot of boat traffic most of the time, that boat traffic is one of the main modifiers of wildlife behaviour here, and particularly for birds like, for example, great-crested grebes. You know, they nest down at water level on rafts of vegetation, and it only takes one big boat coming through here going too fast at the wrong time of year to wash out those nests and completely destroy the breeding success. That hasn't happened over the last few months, and because of it, the grebes are doing fantastically well. You know, it's too early to say whether that will have long-lasting effects, but certainly now, if the big boats come through too fast, those stripy youngsters can just climb up onto the adults' backs and probably be okay. This is also true of other birds that nest down at water level, like the coots and the moorhens. You know, there are nests down this stretch that would just never have survived if we'd had normal boat traffic through here. This one here on the struts of a bridge just downstream of here, you can see these two red, punky-haired youngsters that would never have had the opportunity, certainly not to have nest right there under normal conditions. The river right now is uncharacteristically clear, it's unpolluted, and that may well have had something to do with the fact that the eruption of aquatic insects this year has also been uncommonly good. So it started a little bit earlier than I would expect, and the peak has lasted rather longer. It starts off with the midges and the caddisflies, and then the mayflies. And seriously, this is a wildlife spectacle to equal anything you'll see in the country. It's incredible to think that we are just a stone's throw away from some really major towns and cities, and yet you can see this explosion of life, those golden backlit insects bouncing around in their nuptial flights. It really is something quite special and something we've seen almost every single evening here. And because you have this glut of protein arriving all at the same time, there's lots and lots of other animals that come in to feast on it, and I'm going to be speaking about those tomorrow night. But Chris, you know, I have absolutely no evidence to back any of this up, just pure and simple what I've seen. What do you think? Is it possible? Could it have had this positive effect on my wildlife?
I don't think your observations are untoward, Steve. I mean, you know, lifetime of intuition, it might be subjective, there's no data there, but no, I wouldn't argue with you at all. The sad thing is, I think, that all of the great amateur naturalists who go out doing all of our surveys and censuses haven't been able to get out either, so we can't make that data imperative yet, can we?
We can't, and let's just hope that any positive effects there are will last.
Indeed, and the case here in the New Forest is, of course, that a lot less people have been out on the New Forest with their dogs. 45% at least of the ground bird species here are ground nesting. So without all those dogs off the lead, we're hoping for a bumper year when it comes to them fledging their young. Now, another one of the challenges of lockdown, particularly like people like Steve with young children, is not only keeping them at home and keeping sane, but also, of course, playing teacher. I'm sure a lot of people now have a lot more respect for those teachers who do that job 5 days a week, because home education has been part and parcel of many a home. One of our cameramen, Toby Huff, decided that he would up the ante and integrate wildlife gardening, improving his patch into his home curriculum.
Being a wildlife cameraman means being away from home. I've been privileged to go to some amazing wild and remote places. But in March this year, all that changed. Like much of the world and all of the UK, we went into lockdown. We're really lucky that we've got a garden and that we can go outside. I've got 2 children, Sophie and Josh. My wife's a teacher and as a key worker, she's in school while I home educate our 2 children, ironically enough. It was a pretty daunting prospect to start with, I'll be honest. I think a lot of parents are feeling that just now.
That's more like that colour, though.
The children need to do their schoolwork, but I want to give them some flavour of what I get up to when I'm at work. Maybe to encourage them and to inspire them outside a bit more. It's good for your mental health. And so I came up with the Spring Garden Challenge. We've given ourselves 6 weeks to see if we can improve the amount of wildlife that's in the garden. The garden's not that big. It's never really been that well looked after. We live in a village, but there's countryside nearby, and we're surrounded by other gardens, so there is wildlife around, and if we can encourage it to stay, that would be marvellous. We need to document the change, so we started with a few surveys. We've done a bird count.
Blue tip.
Where?
In the bird box.
Maybe we'll get some little blue tip chicks.
They used pitfall traps.
Just a little bit more, I think.
To assess how many mini beasts they could find. They didn't catch very many. It's a bit disappointing, really, but they did it in good spirits. They sat for a while and watched the butterflies and bees as well.
There's a peacock on the fence.
We've also explored the tiny pond that we have.
I saw something move.
I think they've enjoyed looking at the wildlife in the garden so far, and they've got some ideas about what we can do to improve it.
They're birds.
The garden's got potential, but it's going to take some work. It's pretty obvious we don't have enough plants for bees and butterflies. We've managed to source most of our plants from barrows at the side of the road in the village. The challenge is a focus which gives us an opportunity to work together and to be together in a way that we just don't if I'm away. The kids restored and cleaned up the old bird feeders. The kids also built a bug hotel, somewhere for the mini beasts to live. The morning after the robin nest box was put up, a robin went in it and had a look. The pond's in pretty good shape, I think. But what we did do is build another little pond so that hopefully the birds can have a drink or a bathe. It really feels like we've done a lot to improve the garden for wildlife and for us. But will it come? We'll just have to wait and see. We've had a genuinely nice time doing this. We planted loads of plants, and that's made a real difference. The kids have found amazing wildlife.
Oh, a frog.
And they've been super excited to see it. We've had robins, blackbirds, even a jackdaw. A whole gang of starlings came in. It feels like it's busy, like there's more going on. Josh went pond dipping and found a newt. That was pretty exciting.
It looks kind of like a frog with a tail. Yeah.
We haven't had any nesting birds, as far as we know, aside from a wood pigeon. It's been sitting on 2 eggs now for a couple of weeks. To see if we've got a hedgehog in the garden or not, we put out a tube with food in it and kind of ink pads that we made with charcoal. So it's kind of wet. We definitely saw hedgehog tracks, backed up with hedgehog poo.
There and there.
You can make simple improvements and nature will grow and thrive. You don't have to go to the wild and remote places to find it. Obviously, what we've done hasn't been scientific, but what it has been is tremendous fun. It's got us all out in the garden. The kids have had a focus over the last 6 weeks. We know the garden's thriving because we've got bigger animals. We've got newts, frogs, birds, a hedgehog.
Right, well, that's it then. Thank you very much for all your help.
You're welcome.
Spring Garden Challenge is over.
Aww. Can we do a summer garden challenge? And a winter garden challenge.
It is so lovely seeing that hard work come to fruition. And I tell you what, there's been a lot of hard work going on over here too. I'm at Woodland Valley Farm, and it's the home of the Cornwall Beaver Project. Now, this is an amazing experiment, a 5-year trial to work out what impact beavers have on their environment. So this is producing scientific, quantifiable data on the impact they have on the environment. Now, why is this important? Well, there was a time when beavers were abundant and widespread right across mainland Britain, and it wasn't just their presence, but also their activity that supported and enabled a whole host of species to thrive. So as such, they're known as keystone species, and add to that title, they're also ecosystem engineers, which means they actually engineer their habitats and create them. And as they do so, they create these wetland habitats by digging canals and rerouting waterways ways and felling and coppicing trees, and of course doing what beavers are really famous for, which is building dams. And they create these wetland habitats, these ponds and beaver lakes, which is perfect for them, but also perfect for a whole host of other species. Now, what happened to them then if they were so widespread and abundant? Well, yes, there were lots of them, but they were also very, very popular for their fur and for their meat. And every last one was hunted. So by the 1600s, beavers were extinct in Britain. Now, we may not have noticed their absence initially, but certainly in the last 100 years or so, as the way we've used the landscape has radically changed, and also coupled with climate change, we've maybe started to feel their impact a little bit more, and scientists really believe that this is starting to become a real problem. Now, if you can cast your minds back to pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic, Britain was on the tail end of one of the wettest winters on record, the 5th wettest winter on record. And much of the country was waterlogged, had experienced severe flooding. And just 1 mile downstream from here is the village of Laddock, and they are no strangers to flooding. A few years back, the village of Laddock had several flash floods, and there was absolutely catastrophic damage done to the village. And the people got together, they wanted to figure out how to prevent themselves from future flooding. They looked at all sorts of solutions, but they came up and decided to settle with a low-cost natural solution. And they crowdfunded all of this, the Cornwall Beaver Project, together with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust and the universities of Southampton and Exeter and Plymouth. Lots of people very interested in working out just what difference a beaver can make, or at least in this case, 2 beavers. So rewind to the summer of 2017, and a pair of Eurasian beavers were released here, a male and a female. They were released on a Friday, they scoped the place out on a Saturday, and on Sunday they got to work. And they have not stopped since. They have absolutely, utterly transformed this area from a patch of relatively unproductive agricultural land. They have now created a wetland habitat, and there's several new species records recorded here ever since they've been reintroduced. So it's an extraordinary transformation. The beavers are thriving, the wildlife is thriving, but what does that mean for the people of Laddock or anyone else interested in using beavers as a flood management defense? Now, we've got this lovely little model here to try and demonstrate how beaver dams might prevent flooding. And upstream from our lovely dam here, we've got these sponges that represent this tangle, this amazing habitat behind me that would soak up rainfall, and behind the beaver dam there, it stores it. Now, if we were to remove the dam, as you see, the water would flow down. Now, obviously, this is quite a crude representation, and that would be like a breach in the dam. But actually, what scientists have found over here is that this area in high rainfall, this little enclosure, holds back about 1,000 cubic meters of water. That's 1 million liters of water. So that's quite extraordinary. Now, especially when you think that's for a bunch of beavers. Now, talking about beavers, we have had amazing views right the way through while we've been on air. We saw live beavers earlier on, and we've got a cameraman on standby at the moment to see if we've got any live beavers. But we've also got trail cams rigged right around this enclosure. And we've got a few right now live. And it's amazing because right now we've got little glimpses, and when we see them swimming along, we only catch a tiny, but these are big, big animals. So we've got trail cams all around here, and you can see this one here. It's just popping its head up over the water, taking a little sniff. You really don't get a sense of how big these animals are. These are some of the biggest rodents in the world, and we'll be seeing more of that later. But of course, watching wildlife is not just fun, it's good for the soul, but it also helps us get through some hard times. And Michaela just last year went to join one man who found his peace watching another one of our iconic mammals.
First thing I do in the mornings when I get up, I check outside straight away, see what's going on out in the garden. makes me feel good, it makes me smile, it makes my heart rate go up. It's special. I like the peace, the space, the tranquility, and I'm very lucky to have just somewhere to breathe.
Mark Mason Gardner has lived in London for 30 years.
Look at this.
The flowers are looking lovely as well.
Oh, it all looks gorgeous.
I like it.
7 years ago, an illness left him wheelchair-bound and on intensive pain treatment. Confined to his home, his passion for wildlife became especially important.
Mark, a lot of people in their London gardens, you know, get birds and obviously insects, squirrels, things like that, but you've got something a little bit special in your garden, haven't you?
Oh yeah. I've just come out of hospital. I was sitting in the garden and I noticed that there was something on the cabin roof. So I looked and I couldn't believe it. There was the most beautiful fox you'd ever seen. He was so handsome. And he was intrigued by me. I was intrigued by him because I thought, why is he not running away? I felt like it was going to be one of those one-time things where you have that kind of thing with an animal, but it wasn't. You know, he started to come back every day, chilling on top of the cabin roof. He was a very calm fox. He wasn't bothered by me, but I respected the distance and kept that distance. After my first encounter of Oscar, because that's what I called the fox, it kind of opened up a whole new world for me. And I've been enjoying visits from various foxes for the last 7 years, and it's magical.
Seeing the foxes became a life-changing event for Mark. Not only did they help him escape his physical limitations, they also marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. After watching from his purpose-built hide in the garden and observing from his window, Mark began documenting his foxy visitors.
They're completely chilled in your garden.
Yeah,
it's absolutely astonishing.
They feel safe.
Over the years, Mark has built up a family tree of all the foxes in his garden through the generations.
This is pretty impressive down the bottom. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cubs in one litter. Oh, that must have been amazing to watch.
The garden was just fantastic. It was like little fireworks going off everywhere for about 4 months, bouncing, running, chasing. And you also see them starting to learn their skills that they need. Just such an insight.
Do you have any favourites, Mark, out of all the ones that you've had in the garden?
Over the 7 years, yeah. Forrest. Forrest is my favourite. He's probably the fox that spent the most time in the garden. When I first saw him, both his eyes were bright red. So I think he had a head trauma, maybe knock from a car. And within about a month, his eyes started to glaze over, and it was clear that he was blind in one eye.
But coped?
Well, he did more than cope. He held his territory for 3 years. He had 3 sets of cubs with his partner. He was magical. Seeing him do what he did every single day gave me strength, makes me feel better.
I really wanted to get a glimpse of the foxes that share their world with Mark, but I also felt that I'd be intruding into their very personal relationship.
Wow, look at that. If I was a fox, I'd stay indoors today.
Mark, can you imagine what it would be like now if you didn't have this haven and this connection to the foxes?
I'd probably be a bit lost, because the garden, the foxes, it's my compass. It gives me direction, gives me something to do, takes my mind off of pain. It's like a medicine, it's like a tonic. Everybody should turn to nature. When you have things in your life that go wrong, just slow yourself down, catch a window, get a seat, and just enjoy what visits, and they will come.
I think you're a shining example of the healing power of nature, Mark.
Oh, thank you.
You know, I know exactly how Mark feels because foxes bring me no end of pleasure as well. It was in this very earth that last year 5 little cubs came out and played in this area of the woods. It was absolutely delightful. Sadly, I haven't seen any cubs anywhere near the house this year, but Mark's been a lot luckier. Look at this, in his back garden for the first time, no less than 7 cubs suckling from their mother. What a delightful sight. Oh, one of the most magic moments of spring, no question about that whatsoever. He's got the trampoline out again as well. And this one, well, you might think it's having fun. I would say it was training because this is a mouse punch pouch in training. That's what they do. They hop like that so that they can pounce onto those mice. They all have a little go. And eventually, I think Mum thinks, do you know what, I want to get on the trampoline as well. But of course, there's no chance for her, not with that many cubs hanging around. Now, why do you think that fox cubs in the UK can only ever have a maximum of 8 cubs and successfully rear them? The reason is that typically they only have 8 nipples. Sometimes 10, but normally 8. You see, I like those little facts, those little bits of fascination, but sometimes you don't need the science. When it comes to nature, sometimes just the pure beauty is enough. We've asked one of our wildlife cameraman, Raymond Besson, to go out and record the area around his home on the Orkney shores. What about that? Absolutely stunning. Ending with the Aurora Borealis. What a place, what a place, what a moment. Sadly, we're running out of time, but we've got more coming up tomorrow. Yolo, what are you going to be offering us tomorrow?
I'll be delving deeper into our magnificent raptors, including, of course, the goshawk.
And I'll be back at the Cornwall Beaver Project looking at the amazing adaptations that make these animals so awesome.
And I'll be meeting some migrants who've travelled thousands of miles to set up home at the end of my garden.
Fantastic stuff. You can keep up to date with all of those live cameras on the iPlayer and the BBC website. We'd love to hear from you, of course, at BBC Springwatch, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. We'll be back tomorrow night. What a start we've had tonight. 8 o'clock, BBC 2. We'll see you then. Good night.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.